Hello, and welcome to Please Me. Last week, Marina Pearson, the best-selling author of the book Goodbye, Mr. X, A Woman's Guide to Moving On, was on the show talking about how to manifest the life you want to live. She talked about the road from shame to self-satisfaction in the bedroom, and you won't want to miss how she got her big clit energy. Go back and listen. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Eve is a licensed physical therapist who is on a mission to destigmatize conversations about sex. In her PT practice, Eve treats conditions related to sexual health. Please relax and enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to Please Me, the podcast that aims to destigmatize conversations about sex by turning the sheets into our classroom. I am so excited to welcome guest Leslie Draffin on the podcast today, and she is a somatic psychedelic guide and a sensual embodiment coach and a menstrual cycle educator, which I'm super excited to explore because I myself always had horrible periods all the way up until, recently. So I definitely can't wait to explore some of that information with you. Leslie believes that sacred earth medicine has the power to bring us home to ourselves, awaken our authenticity, and heal the trauma locked within our subconscious. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Leslie to the show. Hi, Leslie. How are you today?
Hi. I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about our conversation.
Me too. I really am. Let's talk about how you went from being a TV news anchor to a trained psychedelic guide and somatic embodiment coach, and you use pleasure to do so. So I would
Yeah.
love to explore that.
Yeah. So I knew from a really young age that I wanted to be a storyteller and I wanted to shine a light on the things in the world that were hidden and in the dark. And the natural progression of my very type A overachiever perfectionist ways was to go into the corporate world and go into media. I started my career in some really small markets in West Virginia, and then I was in the Charlotte area and finally ended my career in Texas. And for me, journalism was the dream job that really worked well for me until it didn't, until it became a nightmare. I ended up suffering from anxiety, depression, PTSD, and burnout. The pandemic was a doozy on a lot of us, and I was the essential anchor who had to be there at work, absorbing more people's trauma, doing more work, and really didn't understand what secondary PTSD even looked like, or how much that trauma and that stress was deeply impacting my body. And so my spiritual awakening happened, thankfully, a couple of years before the pandemic. I'm really grateful that I had some beautiful spiritual practices and self growth practices to help me when the pandemic really reached its height. Things like meditation and breath work and grounding. And so in 2020, I decided to come off of hormonal birth control. I think that's probably like the thing that started it all, because I really was faced with a PCOS diagnosis and this like internal voice that kept telling me like, you're disconnected, like you're hiding your femininity, like there is something more for you. There's something more for you. There's something more. And so now looking back, several years later, that little girl who wanted to shine the light, who wanted to be a voice, who wanted to tell stories and help people, is really able now to shine through in the work that I do as someone who helps people go into their deep, dark subconscious and pull things out of there to look at in the light, to help release the shame and the stigma around things like sex and psychedelics. And I really feel like my own journey with psychedelics and sex and my menstrual cycle helped me, one, understand when I needed to leave TV. I finally reached my breaking point in 2022, and also helped me reestablish what the fuck I was put here to do and who I am after tying so much of my identity into a job that was like so public facing. Like I really had to grapple with who am I and what am I here to do after I am no longer a news anchor. And psychedelics and sex certainly helped me with that journey.
So, it's funny because my next question is, how did psilocybin, I don't know how to pronounce that.
Psilocybin.
Psilocybin, there we
Yeah.
go.
You can
I
say magic
recently,
mushrooms.
magic mushrooms or psilocybin. How did psilocybin help improve your sex life? And it's interesting that this is what you do, because I had another guest on. Her name is Mizzy Bender, and she's a big swinger lifestyle. She puts on events and she has a boutique. And anyway, she was the opener of season 2, the first episode. And she talked about how how smoking medical marijuana or marijuana can enhance your sex life, how it can enhance your the feeling that you have, your sensuality, and your sensation. And she said that she also used magic mushrooms, which I know very little about. So I'm super, super excited to ask you how this helped you improve your sex life.
Yeah. So the first thing to understand is that psilocybin and many psychedelics like it helps to rewire our neural pathways in our brain. It helps to turn on certain parts of our brain and dim other parts of the brain. And it works. There's much more of a scientific background that you guys can easily look up, and I don't feel like is appropriate for our conversation. But basically, what's interesting is it helps us to create new patterns and helps us to really stick to those patterns and those new habits. Where this comes in really interestingly enough for folks who are struggling with intimacy, low libido, lack of desire, so on and so forth, I have found is that one, it may help us to become more interested in pleasure seeking activities because it's turning off the part of our brain, or I guess what I should say, dimming the part of our brain that is very much the one that's the monotonous side of us, the pattern, like the routine. And so when we start to microdose, what often happens is the medicine, aka the mushrooms, may help us to become more present, may help us to become more mindful. And a lot of times, presence and mindfulness is like the missing piece we need to actually start to feel pleasure and to start connecting with ourself. And so that's one way, right? The presence and the mindfulness aspect. And sometimes pleasure just starts to naturally happen. You sit outside and look at the sunset and you're like, holy shit, this is amazing. And that is pleasure. That is sensuality. Another thing that can be really wonderful, and the way that it helped me specifically, it helped me to uncover the shame that I had locked very deep in my body around my herpes diagnosis at age 18, excuse me. And the men that I was with and the things that I had allowed to happen to me after that diagnosis that really damaged my self-worth, made me feel unlovable, and made me feel like I wasn't worthy of receiving. And so when I started working with the mushrooms, I really specifically wanted to become open to receiving pleasure. And I say a lot of the times that the medicine will give you what you need, not necessarily what you want. And so while I really wanted it to help me with pleasure, what it knew I needed first was to become open to receiving through surrendering. And so that was the year I left my job. It was the year that I like completely went through my dark night of the soul to actually find my soul's purpose. And so looking at the shame, looking at the inner wounding, and being able to first notice and become aware of where it happened, when it happened, and how is it happening now. So I worked with this wonderful coach whose name is Bijou. She goes by Mushroom Mamacita. And we really worked together to help me reprogram and repattern this shame and this like feeling of not being good enough to receive this pleasure. We worked together for several months and I had all hell break loose. So it didn't actually come in those months together. I talk about this sometimes. It's like, sometimes you work with a coach and the thing that you really want doesn't necessarily happen right then. For me, it happened about a year later. 23 was my most orgasmic year of my entire life because
Woo!
I finally understood how to be present. I had looked at the shadow of my herpes diagnosis and the shame that that created within me. And then the third piece, and the reason why I think psilocybin is great for people who are in partnered relationships, is when you microdose together or even do like a mid-sized dose journey, so not a microdose where you're actually tripping a little bit, but nothing too extreme, you're able to really, I think, consciously connect with that person on a soul level. And you understand we are one, like we want like the same thing. And I'm speaking for as someone who is in a very loving and supportive relationship. Obviously, if you're not, this may not pertain to you. But the psilocybin for me really allowed me to see into my partner in a different way and allowed me to release the whole idea of like, I have something else to do, something better to do than like slow down and receive this sex, to receive this pleasure. And it allowed me to finally assert my needs, wants, and desires in a way that felt conscious and not like nagging or not like critiquing. And so that was another reason that it really brought me closer to my partner, which I really feel like brought me closer to a better sex life. But I will also say, self-intimacy is the most important thing psilocybin will bring you. And when it also will bring you intimacy with a partner, I think that's the icing on the cake. But self-intimacy, I think, is really where um, pleasure really lies. It's within you.
Absolutely. And you mentioned two things that I want to touch upon, one of which is, the diagnosis of a sexually transmitted
Mhm.
infection. And this can be very shameful for
Yeah.
people. And it can send you into a downward spiral,
Mhm.
and, you're expressing that yourself. But, herpes is, 66% of the population has herpes,
Mhm.
so it is extremely common.
Yep.
And there is no shame in having a sexually transmitted infection.
No.
I'm saying this for my listeners here, not
Yeah.
for you because you've done the work, but
Yeah.
I'm saying it for the people out there that are listening. There is no shame in having a sexually transmitted infection. It could be viral, it could
Mhm.
be bacterial, um, just like the flu, COVID, and every other cold
Yeah.
out there. It is something that you catch, just like that. And there are treatments, usually, hopefully, not for everything. So you have to be very careful. So I like to consider myself, the face of safe sex because I really like to talk about, safety with sexuality, so that people can enjoy sex in a safe way because, not everybody is in a loving relationship,
Right.
where they feel comfortable with their partner having oral sex, without protection and those sorts of things. Um, Safety is so important in hookup sex. Safety is so important in sex when you haven't had that conversation with your partner to test together.
Mhm.
Safety is so important with oral sex because a lot of people may use a condom, but then, go down on their partner or let them go down on you. And, that is also unsafe. And so you have to consider all of those things,
Mhm.
when having sex. And a lot of people just jump right in without even having these conversations.
Yeah.
So, um, and then you mentioned being present, right? Being present and in the moment. And how can you possibly enjoy sex if your mind is somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So your mind has to be in the right place. You have to be present in the moment to truly enjoy it. And if you have trauma in your history, which almost everybody has some kind of shit in their history, right?
Mhm.
It's rare for you to
Yeah.
come to adulthood completely intact with no trauma whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
So we all have something that we need to heal from.
Mhm.
And, and a lot of times that can really affect the biggest sex organ in our brain, which is, the biggest sex organ in our body, which is our brain, right?
Yeah.
And if your mind is not connected to what you're doing and you're not able to be present in your body, then you're not going to enjoy sexuality like you should.
Mhm.
And I was talking to another guest, and she is a kink expert,
Mhm.
and her name is Julieta Chiara. And she was talking about how, kink can really bring you to the present moment. And, if you've ever gotten the right amount of, pressure on a good booty slap,
Yeah.
nothing like a big good booty slap to bring you right into the moment, so kink can also be a tool to help you get present and in the moment. And I love the idea of using magic mushrooms to help you to be present as well.
Mhm.
What does it feel like when you are taking psilocybin, and how does it keep you present? Because I'm assuming that your mind can wander
Yeah.
with any kind of extra help. So
Yeah.
just go into that a little bit
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Of course. So I really coach and teach around intentional microdosing or mindful microdosing, which we can talk about in a minute. The first thing, I think, that first question, like, what do you feel? That is such a misconception in the microdosing and psychedelic community. There's this word called subperceptual that gets thrown around a lot. And I have really shifted to using the word non intoxicating, because when you are super present, I do think that you feel your microdose. It could feel like you feel more focused. So sometimes it feels like you've had a cup of coffee, and it also can feel like you've had a glass of wine. Sometimes it makes us more open and alert. Sometimes it just kind of calms us down. I usually describe it as a heart opening and expanding feeling. Um, and so if you're someone who isn't, super spiritual, that might like look like being more emotional. Maybe you see a commercial and it like makes you cry, and you're like, what the hell? Like, I would never normally do this. And it's like, oh, well, I microdosed this morning. So of course I'm more open. And the thing about psilocybin and psychedelics in general, they do expand, right? They are not non-ordinary states of consciousness is one way that they're um, referred to, and then also non-specific expanders. So if you're really intending to feel more, expect to feel a lot more. And it could be the things that you want to feel, and it may be things that you don't like to feel, like sadness or pain. But when you ask the medicine to help you feel more, you bet your ass it's going to help you feel more, all of the things. So those are some ways to explain it. It's hard for folks who've never experienced microdosing to hear those things, and because it's not a set answer, and everyone is very unique and individual. The other thing that's really fascinating is that when we're taking these tiny doses, right? A microdose is a tiny, tiny dose of a medicine. That at higher doses can produce hallucinations, like the whole tripping vibe, like you can't walk, you're in another spaced out world. On these tiny levels, you can still parent, you can still drive, you can still do your work. I anchored the news after microdosing. Like, you can still
Okay.
be a fully functioning person in society, and that's one of the biggest benefits is you're able to incorporate it into your everyday life. And so that's what you might feel around a psilocybin experience.
Feeling all of that. And, I think it's interesting because a lot of people don't want to feel. I mean, they purposely, drink too much to not
Yeah.
feel. They purposely, self-medicate to not feel because they don't want to feel the pain. They don't want to feel, and I'm not talking about like pain in their body, although that could be one reason, but I'm talking about like emotional pain, right?
Mhm.
Pain from their past. They don't want to feel that. So a lot of people, especially people that have been, sexually abused or abused in general, will use drugs and alcohol to push down those
Yeah.
feelings. So it's probably got to be very scary to
Mhm.
kind of open up to the possibility of that,
Yeah.
because you're asking for all of that, because you're not
Mhm.
just only feeling the good things like you said, you might be also feeling all of the bad stuff too. However, that is the only path to getting to the other side, and living the most fulfilling life that you can live. So if you're brave enough to move into that journey, this is a great way to do it. And I would guess that it would be a way to do it much more quickly than, I would say, maybe like, therapy, which can take years,
Yeah.
or, all of the other self help type things that, can take many, many years to kind of get to the point
Mhm.
of really moving to the other side of feeling like you're on the other side of that and are healed and can now live your life in the best way possible. Would you say that that is a trigger to accelerate things?
100%. Yeah. I think that at a certain point, talk therapy becomes obsolete for certain people, especially people who are really intelligent, who are very aware of their problems, who can talk very easily about the trauma. And maybe easily isn't the best word, but are articulate in their trauma. They know what happened to them, but they still don't know why the fuck they don't feel better. That was certainly me. I was in therapy for years through eating disorders, alcohol abuse, a terrible divorce, and the herpes thing, right? Like, I would have these conversations with my therapist, and she would just be like, "You're so smart. Like, you're just so well versed. Like, it's so easy to talk to you about all these things." I'm like, "Yeah, but like, why do I still feel like shit?" And so, what I have noticed around medicine work specifically is that it helps get into your subconscious where talk therapy can't. Your therapist isn't going to know how to pull things out of your subconscious if you don't even know it was there. And so, while medicine will never do the work for you, it opens the door to your subconscious and holds your hand while you do the work in a very loving and gentle way on the microdosing level. And so, yeah, if you have things in your past like sexual assault, violence done on your body, childhood trauma, mother wounds, sister wounds, all of those are things that I have seen my clients deal with and heal. Some of those things are things I have also dealt with and healed through the assistance of this sacred earth medicine. And to something we spoke about, or you asked about earlier, how do we do it mindfully and how do we stay present in that? I think that's really the key is first looking at this as sacred medicine. This is not a pharmaceutical drug. And like I said, it's not going to do any of the work for you. You still have to be willing to do the hard shit of healing. But when we enter into a relationship with this medicine and ask it to come into our life and help us, I see it as a very sentient teacher that wants the very best for us. And so, mindfully and intentionally engaging in a conversation with this medicine does allow us to look into the shadowy parts of ourselves with a little bit more ease and grace, with a little more courage and bravery. And I think that what can really help folks who are on a path of healing when things in their past have been really dark, one, always getting support. Maybe it is your therapist who's able to support you through additional like medicine work, or at least is okay with you discussing that in therapy. There's a lot of rules around that, and some therapists kind of shy away from that. That's why a therapeutic coach like me comes in really handy. But having someone to help hold you and guide you while you navigate that is, I think, essential. Help is always essential, um, in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, I think that the medicine is pretty magical. And I'm not going to talk shit on talk therapy because I was in it for a really long time, but knowing what I know about somatic trauma recovery and being trained in that aspect of things as a somatic psychedelic guide, I know that it's in your body where you're holding a lot of that trauma. And talk therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't often get into those nitty gritty, like the fascia and the issues that are in our tissue. And so the somatic psychedelic aspect, when you're in this, expanded state, can help to like show you where you need to move through things, can show you what step you need. Do I need to move through this with breath or with sound or with massage or with screaming or with journaling or with getting in nature? And it's just such a beautifully holistic way to come back home to ourselves. Um, and I really just find that it's like the skyrocket to healing when you feel like you're taking like the long way around with therapy.
And, if you're listening to this right now and you've been in therapy for
Yeah.
years and you feel like you've hit a wall,
Yes.
you know, this is really something to consider,
Mhm.
because it can get you to that other side,
Yep.
and it's medicinal, it's natural,
Yep.
and if done in small dosing, like you said, is can be very safe.
Yeah. And so safety is such an interesting thing to talk about too. Psilocybin itself is one of the safest things that you can ingest. And still, it's not for everybody. When I work with clients or do consults with people who are prospective clients, the two questions I always ask, have you had a personal family history? So you, a parent or a sibling with bipolar or schizophrenia?
Okay.
And are you on any types of heart medications? So in the studies that we have seen on psilocybin, they're constantly more coming out. So that's amazing. And I'm so excited about
Yes.
that. There have been a couple of things that have shown that it can raise your blood pressure, and
Okay.
heart rate. So that's why I usually tell people who are on heart medications, you need to talk to your doctor first. And I'm not a doctor and I'm not a mental health professional. And so I certainly cannot diagnose or cure or do any claims that are going to guarantee that they're, one, going to be safe, or two, guarantee that they're going to be healed. So I like to say that as a disclaimer. As far as bipolar and schizophrenia, so I certainly know people who have had those diagnoses in the past who still work with psilocybin. Maybe it was the correct diagnosis and maybe it wasn't. What's interesting about those two diagnoses is that they're very expanding outward diagnoses. And as we've already talked about, psilocybin is an expander. And so part of the worry, I think, for a lot of people around the combination of those two things, that diagnosis and this medicine, is vast expansion, out of control expansion, what we would call spiritual emergency. What's interesting to know, though, is anxiety, depression, PTSD are very contracting, right? It's very like inner. I'm anxious. I'm in my own head. I'm depressed. I can't get out of bed. Those are very like lower, while schizophrenia and bipolar are expanders, anxiety, depression are the opposite. And that's where psilocybin is very potent and powerful, because it does help to expand you out of that state in a really gentle way. But it's, like I said, very safe for the majority of people. But there are some folks who may have contraindications around the use of psilocybin. So I'm glad we talked about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And just out of curiosity, do you do virtual?
Yeah.
Um, okay, and in person too, or just
This
virtual?
year, we're hoping to do some in person. I have some
Okay.
local clients to where I live, and I have seen them in person.
Okay.
And I started a psychedelic society in Central Texas where like we meet in person, but the majority of my work is done virtually online. And I think that that's fine. Like I at first kind of wondered, would that be as potent? It certainly is a more unique container to ingest a little bit of mushrooms and then come meet with me on Zoom. But it seems to work really well. That's how I did it with my coach. It was transformative, and I've really seen it be transformative for the people that I work with too.
I'm so curious about this, and my mind just goes to, I would love to try this with you as a podcast episode, and explore what comes out for me. Maybe not necessarily as like a regular podcast, but
Yeah.
maybe like something extra that I can offer my listeners, because I think it would be super interesting to see what came out of,
Mhm.
and to show people what is possible, and I'm very open-minded about these sorts of things, and I love medical marijuana for for me. It helps me with my anxiety, and
Mhm.
it also helps me with my sleep.
Yeah.
But the added bonus is that it helps me feel in my body, and sexually it helps me connect with my sensations, and with me not going off to
Yep.
that other, that trauma place where
Yeah.
often, your mind goes to that trauma place and you have to bring yourself back to your
Mhm.
body to really enjoy. And it helps me to kind of stay present, and to feel, the sensations are more strong and all of that. So this, I'm definitely curious. So we'll have to talk after the podcast
Yeah.
more about that for sure. Um,
Absolutely.
I was reading online that you are the daughter of a preacher,
Mhm.
and you had a lot of shame, I'm assuming, around sexuality, and I'm curious to know how you overcame that and got to the other side.
I became a witch. That's the short answer. Yeah.
It's funny. I
So
often say that I am a witch, so it's funny that you say that.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. So when I was diagnosed with herpes at 18, it was just a few weeks after I'd lost my virginity. And I was raised deeply
Wow.
in religion. Deeply in religion. And this whole idea of like, if you have sex before marriage, something bad will happen. Oh, well, something bad did happen to me. And I was away at college. This was in 2005. And my family did not know how to talk to me about this. So they just kind of let me do my own thing. And by do my own thing, I was already anorexic. And so I just went way deeper into that eating disorder to have some form of control and started drinking. And then for the next years, disconnected so fully from my body and slowly religion as well, that I just became like a shell of a person who was an overachiever, did really well in my career, but like drank every single day in order to not feel. And so when I had my spiritual awakening in my early 30s, one of the first things I really started to uncover and like grapple with was like, why was I as a woman made to feel so dirty and shame and just ashamed of being a woman in general? And of course, like if you're someone who grew up in religion, like you get that it was Eve, like the curse of Eve. And that's like why a bunch of stuff, right? We're not going to have a religious lesson here, but
No.
I started looking at, why was that how it was? And I was like, also, why was there no female? Like, where was the yin to the yang, like the feminine to the masculine? And so I really started to connect with the whole idea of like a mother goddess, connecting with female deities, and understanding that part of the reason I felt so bad was that I was so in my masculine and in a wounded form of the masculine energy. And so when I started to understand the feminine, the receptive side of things, the ease, the flow, it's what I so deeply longed for, but I had no fucking idea how to get there. That is one of the reasons I finally understood, okay, I need something else and I need something more. So I started reading about the goddess, the fact that like our ancestors before patriarchy were worshiping the feminine, were worshiping this like creatrix energy that gave birth to life. And I had that power within me too, even though I was never taught that. And so starting to look at how my power comes alive through womb work, through connecting with my cycle, and then through sex and pleasure as well. I think that was the first thing that helped me turn on this light within, like, oh shit, like there is something more to this. Where I started to unlock the issues for me around shame, it started with me connecting with my cycle, right? When I came off of the pill in 2020, I was 33 or 34. I'd been on the pill for like 16 years at this point. And so I had no idea how to sync with my cycle. I didn't know really anything about my cycle because I was born in the deep South, where the extent of our feminine, like reproductive education is like, this is your period. It's going to suck. Like, you should wear a tampon, like, hide it. Don't talk about it. Don't have sex, or something bad will happen to you. So I had to do a ton of learning about my cycle and a ton of unlearning about the taboo internalized within myself that I had picked up along the way of growing up. And so looking at those taboos and the shame that I was like, why do I feel embarrassed about buying tampons? Why do I feel like I don't want to have sex on my period, or like it's gross or it's smelly? Starting there, very quickly, the aha started coming with like sex shame, like shame about how I didn't even know about my body. Like I thought I had gotten pregnant after I had my very first period because I used my dad's towel and didn't have a period for 6 months, which is incredibly common when you have your bleed at 11 years old to not be regular. So it was like the unearthing of the goddess, and then connecting with my cycle, and then awakening my womb, and then finally looking at the shame around sex and pleasure and the like trauma I held within my pussy, that finally allowed me to like, one, shed the layers of religious programming that had been like stacked on me like double layers of paint, like when you just keep painting over it, painting over it, painting over it, to finally like come clean and understand like, you are always divine, you are made in her image, God's image. And like it doesn't make any fucking sense that like when you really think about it, like why would it be a male deity? Like they don't birth the babies. Like it doesn't make sense to
So
me.
true. So true.
So that was sort of how I was able to unlearn those things. Claiming the word witch for me was like a radical statement for myself to be like this. And I do some witchy things, but I'm not someone who really practices witchcraft. I see a witch as a woman in total control of herself, who lives in tune with the earth, who understands her body's natural rhythms, who is present and connected and understands that we come from love, and isn't afraid to look into her fucking shadow and isn't afraid of dark things and loves those just as much as she loves the things that are allowed to be in the light. And I think that psychedelics like just expanded that for me, that knowledge of the universe. Like I've been in psychedelic trips and sat at the foot of the mother goddess multiple times and like understood that like our whole premise and purpose of being here on this planet is to feel love and connection, and to be one with each other. And our ego mind and the patriarchy and all of the oppression that happens to people here on this planet is born of like our separateness. That was a long answer. Hopefully it gave
I
some insight as to where we were and where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved it all because I love, connecting the, sacred feminine. And, our, patriarchal religion doesn't allow for that, right?
Right.
But if you really understand what, your higher power is, it's both feminine and masculine. It's not just masculine.
Right.
Why do we call, and I've always, called God a she, because I'm a she.
Yeah.
And, so why wouldn't my God, if I'm in the image of my God, why wouldn't my God be a woman? Right.
Hell yeah.
Yes. So I can completely relate. And I like the way that you define, being a witch in your opinion. And it's not necessarily like, standing by your cauldron and like,
Yeah.
stirring up your potions or anything like that. It's really just being in touch with yourself, with your femininity, and with the fact that you are connected to Mother Earth,
Yeah.
and we all are. And look at the bad, job we're doing of taking care of our Mother Earth.
Mhm.
I mean, we could really use a shift in energy here because our world and our Earth is dying before our eyes. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's a very scary time to be.
Yeah.
But, it's also amazing that we can have these conversations and help people to get in touch with that, and with their sacred femininity.
Mhm.
Um, so, my next question is, how can we lead a pussy led life?
Oh, we have to start listening to her. And that's the thing. Like,
Yes.
she wants you to listen to her. And the second you start, she will not shut up. I, in December, embarked on 31 days of pleasure. So I like challenged myself to experience pleasure every day. And it didn't necessarily mean that I was going to be having an orgasm every day, but I was just going to become more tuned and in and tapped in to what my pussy wanted. So I usually start and I like when I guide clients or people who are in my group community, the first thing we do is we just place a hand over our vulva. And if you don't know what the vulva is, it is everything you see on the outside of your body down there. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is calling everything you see down there your vagina. That's not
Absolutely.
true. The vagina is just the internal canal. Um,
Right.
and in Latin, it means a sheath for a sword, which is like a sheath for a penis. And we ain't about that life. That's why we reclaim pussy. So, like, just putting your hand over your vulva, your pussy, and like noticing what that feels like just over clothes. Like we're not even getting like naked here. Noticing like with your hand there, what sensations are you feeling now? Does she feel a little tingly? And so learning to listen to what she wants. Um, and maybe she doesn't want sex. Maybe she doesn't want pleasure. Maybe she wants you to like take better care of yourself, eat better foods, move more. There are so many things that she'll tell you when you really learn to listen. The other thing I find that really helps to live a pussy led life is an a deep reverence and attunement to your body's natural rhythms. So cyclical living, understanding how to connect with your womb, And I do that a lot through like meditations or massage, either on the outside, just like a belly massage, or even internal vaginal massage with a crystal dildo or a glass crystal wand. But awakening that part of ourselves, right? Because not only is it related to the sacral chakra, but this is where life force energy is literally born into the earth. So whether you're going to have a human baby or not, like we have the power within us as creatrixes to turn on that Shakti and that life force and that like blossoming into like true manifestation. Like you talk about sex magic, you can talk about like blood magic, you can talk about manifestation in all these different ways, which I talk about a lot as someone who does identify as a witch, but like what more pure manifestation is there than like a child? And you can also turn that exact same energy into like a new business. You can put that type of energy on a project, on a relationship, on like a hobby, on just life in general. So those are, I think, some of the ways that you can live a pussy-led life. But what I think it looks like is it is someone who is so fully in love with themselves. Even if you have issues around your body, even if you have issues in your past that you're not fully like loving or liking, I guess would be the better word, you still have this deep inner, like, you know what? Like, I've got me, I know myself. Self intimacy, I think, is something I really like to say. Some folks like feel a little triggered by the term self-love. I know I was very triggered by that for years.
Okay.
But someone who just knows that I can look at what's happening in my past, I can look at what's happening now, and I have the power to change that and live a life that feels lit from within by being tapped into the essence of my feminine energy, which I feel really comes from like womb and pussy.
So let's talk about the womb work that you do
Yeah.
because this is something new to me. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
And I
So,
definitely want to get into the menstruation too, because, and I'm
sure,
sure that maybe it goes hand in hand.
it does. Yep.
Okay, so go for
Sure.
it.
So when I first came off of the pill, I'm still very much in my masculine energy. I was like, I'm going to learn everything about my menstrual cycle. I'm going to eat for my cycle. I'm going to cycle track my workouts. And I was just masculinating my menstrual cycle. I was trying to do it all right. And that's the
Okay.
thing, I think a lot of us, with how much this is great, like I'm so excited, it's become so popular online, at least on my algorithm. There is so much information. And yet, what I noticed is that you can learn all the things, you can read all the books, like so much books, and you can know nothing within yourself. Your embodied wisdom has to come from a deep and inner connection to like your body, to the sensations in your body, and for me on the journey to really reclaiming this part of myself, to the womb. So for months, I didn't get my period. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? I got some tests, found out I had PCOS. Like, okay. And it
Tell me
wasn't
what that is.
PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Oh, okay.
There
Yes.
are
Okay.
super common.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple different reasons people may have it. Some may have insulin resistance. Some may have post pill PCOS, which is, I believe, what I had. And there are a couple
Okay.
other types as well. But it basically is classified by irregular cycles or elevated male hormones like testosterone or other androgens. And it can also have cysts on the ovaries, but it's also a metabolic disorder that really affects the HPA axis, so your gut brain axis, as well as your womb and your menstrual cycle. They're actually thinking about renaming it because the cysts don't have to be present to actually have PCOS. That's kind of another conversation. But what that
Okay.
meant for me was that I did not get my period. Came off the pill month after month after month, nothing was happening. And so in those months, I'm reading all the books. I'm like doing everything, taking supplements, tracking my cycle with the moon, like just begging my bleed to come on. And what finally helped was slowing down, releasing the idea that I needed to get it all right, and starting to connect with the womb. So when we think of the womb, if you're like not super familiar with where your womb is, it is just underneath the belly button, about the size of a fist. Um, and it's kind of between that pubic bone and like where your belly button is, right?
So
So
you're
that,
talking about your uterus. Is that
uh-huh,
what we're talking about? Okay.
your uterus, and I refer to the womb as like uterus, ovaries,
Okay.
the
Gotcha.
internal reproductive system in general.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So when we connect with that space, we can do things like I've mentioned, massage, which is just out on the outside of the body, like just abdominal massage,
Externally, right?
externally, and creating really loving rituals around that type of self-care. Because I think that we have so many thoughts about what our bellies look like and so much hesitation to even touch that part of ourself, that a massage like that can be really healing and also incredibly triggering. And so that is one step, right? To just start touching that space on your body. Another is to start to meditate. And I love, there are some meditations out there. I actually have one on my podcast where it's like we go into the womb, like you visualize yourself in a cave, and just like the womb, the entrance to a womb and the entrance to the cave, the entrance to the womb is the pussy, by the way. Like, the very like vulva looking like entrance to the cave, you would go in there, visualize yourself in there, visualize yourself in water, because the inner waters of our uterus, aka our blood, those are also powerful ways that you can start to tap in. And I think the other really wonderful way to start doing womb work, the way I do it, because there are a lot of people who are doing internal massages. And I don't touch other people in any of my practice, but there are fantastic pelvic care specialists out there who do that type of work. Um, if you feel up to it, you can massage yourself. So I started to do internal vaginal massages with a crystal dildo
Mm-hmm.
the first time I ever did it. So this looks like, um, think of your pussy as a clock, and you would insert the crystal dildo or a crystal wand slightly, just maybe an inch or two into your vaginal canal, and start at the 12 o'clock and just press a little bit of pressure and breathe. So a little, like it's pressure point massage, I guess is what I should say. So you're holding a
Mm-hmm.
bit of pressure there. You're breathing in, moving that wand to the 3 o'clock spot. Same thing, holding a bit of pressure, breathing in and breathing out to the 6, to the 9. Move in a little bit deeper. Do the same thing around the clock, a little bit deeper, go around the clock. And then eventually you can do a bit of cervical work as well. One, this can help to bring more blood flow to that area, can help to make you feel juicier. Two, it can feel really nice and pleasurable, especially in that G zone. And for me, the first time I did it, I had an immediate intuitive hit of a dude that I had fucked after I got divorced, who was an insane narcissist, and the shit that he used to say about me. It was
Wow.
stored on the upper right quadrant of my vaginal canal, and it felt like I was on pins and needles. Like it felt like a pinch when I massaged it. I wasn't putting a lot of pressure there, but just a little bit of pressure, my intention and attention to breathe through what came up. And suddenly I heard his voice. And it had been years since I had been with this man. I'm like, oh, so doing womb work isn't just me having to face what I feel about my belly, me touching that part of my body, maybe for the very first time. It's also acknowledging that sometimes the energies of our past lovers get stuck in there. Our past trauma can get stuck in the fascia within our vaginal canal and within our womb in general, because it is that pelvic bowl, or what I like to say is the energetic junk drawer, where we stuff all the shit we don't want to look at because it's an empty space in the female body, unless you're pregnant. So
Mm.
tapping into that with those internal massages um, was another way that I was really able to move into a space of deep connection to my womb. And then kind of just allowing my womb to like guide me what I wanted to do. Like, do I feel this? Do I feel that? Like people say your intuition's in your gut. I think it's in your womb and your pussy for sure. When we really think about it. Because the gut and the womb are basically right next to each other, that we know that they talk to each other. We know that through disorders like PCOS because of the gut brain womb microbiome. Um, so yeah, that was a long-winded answer to explain all of the different ways that I have done womb work, and some of the ways that I encourage others to do womb work too.
That's so interesting, how you describe the pressure points that you're giving yourself. And I am a licensed physical therapist that does pelvic floor therapy. and I treat sexual health dysfunction. So, what you're describing was really trigger point therapy, because, just like any other muscle in your body, you can hold tension and have spasms
Hmm.
in those muscles, just like you get a knot in your neck or your traps, and you can't turn your head this way or that way because it's there's a knot there, right? So
Yeah.
your vagina and all of the internal parts of your body, your pelvic floor is also muscles,
Yeah.
and so, all of those muscles can hold tension and can become knotted up.
Yep.
And so what you're physically doing with the wand, and the glass wand is a really great tool because it goes in and out very smoothly,
Hmm.
and it provides a hard surface to kind of push into the surface that you're pushing into the muscle tissue, just like if you were going to do a trigger point,
Yeah.
here you would use your fingers or a tool to like really push on the muscle that's tensed up, right? To
Yeah.
kind of release it. This is exactly what you were doing. And it's interesting that you say that, your past experiences can be stored in that area too, and how they are stored, just physically manifesting themselves is in these knots that are
Yeah.
created in the muscles, and if you don't work on that, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't try to get those knots to be, dissipated, they can stay there forever, So holding on to all of that trauma, and it's literally physically inside of you. And
Yeah.
that's incredible that, when you were working on yourself, you heard that voice, that came
Yeah.
back to you. And that's just, fascinating and very much aligned with what I do, in my physical therapy practice. So I love that, that it's, connecting the dots here.
Mm.
Um, Now, I'm very curious about what you do with the menstrual cycle. I personally, suffered from horrible periods from literally the first time
Mm.
I had a period in sixth grade. And
Mm.
because of that, I was on birth control from the time that I was 17 up until I was ready to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I got off of it, I started having horrible periods again,
Yep.
and so I had to go back on it. And it was just, like a roller coaster of like pain my whole life. So I would love to hear what how the psilocybin can help your menstrual cycles and what else you do in that arena.
So I actually started as a menstrual cycle coach. And for the first year of my coaching career, I was working specifically with the cycle. Um, and so I'd love to just say one thing before I get into how psilocybin really impacts it. It's this idea that like when we have a painful period, they put us on birth control. Birth control is a band-aid. It's like throwing a cup of water on a house fire because it does not get to the root cause of the issue. And most of the time, it's just going to like cover it up. And so it doesn't surprise me that folks who tell me they had really bad periods got on the pill, came off the pill to get pregnant and had a lot of trouble or had a lot of pain. And I'm really sorry that that happened to you. So I'm also really proud of you for sharing about it.
Yeah,
Um,
I wish that I would have known about this, 30 years ago, because I suffered my entire life with my
yeah,
period.
yeah.
It was so painful, and I'll just put it this to you this way, that it was so painful when I came off the pill
Mm,
in order to get pregnant, that when I would get my period, I literally would faint from
mm,
the pain.
mhm.
Literally like standing and just falling to the floor, fainting from the severe pain of my period. And really, it doesn't have to be that way. So I love that you're sharing this information.
Yeah. Yeah. There are so many ways, like there are so many reasons I think that pain happens. Um, and that's kind of another conversation. But when I started to combine menstrual cycle coaching with psychedelic guidance, I had this aha moment where I looked at some of the key things that I knew psilocybin was assisting people with: pain, mental health issues, and and mood and happiness. And I thought, well, shit, like people with periods are going to benefit way more than anyone else from microdosing psilocybin because we have more instances of chronic pain surrounding our cycle. We get diagnosed with anxiety, depression, PTSD more than anyone else. And we know that women and menstruators' happiness overall living in the world we live in is like not that great. So I developed what I call the cyclical microdosing method. And it is a way to microdose in tune with your cycle. So you follow a certain schedule based on where you are in your cycle. And if you are listening to this and you're a little confused about what the menstrual cycle means, if you're someone who has a period, you're always somewhere in your cycle. The
Right.
cycle is not just when you bleed. The
Right.
way that you count your cycle is from day one of your period all the way until the day before your next period. And that's your cycle. Usually the length is between 24 and 38 days, depends on who you are. And so the cyclical microdosing method has you separate your cycle into your first half and your second half. That would be inner spring and summer, which are also the follicular and ovulatory phases, and then fall and winter, which is your luteal and your menstrual phase. And then in the first phase, spring and summer, which is often where cycle challenges are the least likely to happen, you would take medicine 1 day on, 2 days off. So that would be your microdosing protocol or your schedule. It's another fancy way of saying schedule. Then when you shift into the inner fall and inner winter, which is often when cyclical challenges pop up, things like PMS, mood swings, pain, migraines, depression, anxiety, sleeplessness, you would switch to ingesting the medicine for 3 days in a row, skip 2 days, and repeat. What this does is it allows you to sit with medicine more often in the phase of your cycle that is a bit more problematic for you so that you have the support of the medicine in that phase. And in the phase of your cycle where you don't have quite as many challenges, you take a bit more time off of the medicine so you have more time to integrate what's coming up for you. I have found it is almost every single person I've worked with who has had a period has decreased their period pain by like on a scale of 1 to 10. If they would come to me and they were saying it was a 7, they would be like a 4 or 5. So it's helping, right? And this was I usually work with people on a 2 or 4 month cycle. The other thing that I found that was so interesting about cyclical microdosing and really just like syncing with your cycle in general, when you start to pay attention, like we talked about with Pussy, like when you pay attention to Pussy, she wants more attention. She wants you to pay, like she's begging for that. So is your cycle. It wants you to pay attention to it and honor it and do things like rest when you bleed versus like those commercials that were always out in the early 2000s. It was like people in white jumping on trampolines, Playtex sport tampons. Like I can do anything,
Running
you can
across
do
the
better.
beach, right?
Yeah. Like your cycle wants you to honor it and it wants you to slow down and it wants you to really notice, what cyclical challenges might be presenting to you. So when you add psilocybin into someone's life who is experiencing things like PMS or PMDD, so that's premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is basically PMS on crack. It's really helpful to help with the mental challenges that happen and the mood challenges that happen. And when I started to give that protocol to clients and help them work through it, now I don't really see folks just for mental problems, menstrual problems, I should say. I usually ask them about their period in collaboration with any of the other things we're doing. But it's like, even when you go into this type of work where you're looking into your feminine energy and you're trying to connect with that part of yourself, often your menstrual cycle will get back online. Like you'll have a period after not having a period for a while. I've had that happen. Suddenly you won't have cramps. Suddenly you have no mood swings. Like you're not snapping at your partner because, I'm dealing with all these other things. And also my periods don't seem as bad. So that's sort of what I do now in regards to menstrual education. I am really still very passionate about working with teenagers. I have worked with teenagers in the past. They always give me the most trouble, but it's always like the, the most fulfilling. But I just feel like it's so necessary for those like tiny little humans, these early menstruators, to like understand that your cycle is sacred and it is here for you. It didn't happen to you. It is for you so that you can understand you have a superpower. Like you're not the same every single day for a reason. You have these inner feelings and these urges and these cyclical changes for a reason. And it's because you are connected to earth. You are connected to, this rhythm of the moon and this language within your own internal biology of your womb that makes you beautifully, able to navigate even our very busy modern world when you learn to listen to it. And I think that patriarchy and just capitalism in general like has taken so much of that away from us. And I love that I'm seeing on the collective level so many more people tapping into not only their menstrual cycle but psychedelic medicine, and sometimes together with pleasure and sex, to really say like this isn't working for us. Like the way life is right now is not fucking working. What can we do to like awaken ourselves, to heal ourselves individually so that we can help our families heal, and then the collective and the planet heal all together? Because if we don't, what's going to happen?
I 100% agree with you. And, we're a lot of times we are not connecting, to our bodies. And, our to-do list, is preventing us from really getting in touch with ourselves and connecting with our bodies because we have 20 million things to do. And, my period just came. And
Yeah.
now what? I have so much to do. And this is not convenient. And you know
Yeah.
what? Slowing down in that moment and saying, well, what is convenient or what do I really need right
Mm-hmm.
now in this moment to take care of myself? And I think that we don't want the inconvenience because we have too many things to do.
Yeah.
And so we don't look at that. But the fact that you are looking at that and you are giving people permission to slow down, to take notice, to really honor our femininity, honor our body, honor our cycle,
Mm-hmm.
you know, is so important for women.
Yeah.
So important for women. And especially, I mean, everybody really, but like young women that are just learning about their cycles so that they can have a better relationship than I know I had with mine, you know?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt so much shame when I first started to do this work because I was like, why did I know about this earlier? And the thing is, it's like, I always say there's no like true destination. Like we're not trying to get anywhere. We're just trying to come home to ourselves, to like understanding who we are, to like living in tune with our natural cycles and rhythms. And so I work with people who are in their 50s, have had a whole life of not knowing this. And the last thing we're going to do is bring more shame into that. So it's okay if you've never heard about this, whatever age you are, this is the
Right.
perfect time. You're hearing the conversation right now for a reason.
Absolutely. So we are running out of time, believe it or not. And I know we can go on and on and on. We might have to have a part two. And I've been saying that a lot lately because, I'm getting some really awesome guests. But um, I want to know, and I ask this to all of my guests, and I would love to know what your favorite sex position is.
So my favorite sex position is a boring one. It's missionary, but like with a pillow under my ass.
Okay, that's very specific. I like that. I like
Hmm.
that. And
Lift up the hips.
tell me what that does for you.
Better clitoral and G zone stimulation with the tilting of the hip up.
Okay.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because, a lot of people think of missionary as being a very boring position, right? And it has like that reputation.
Yeah.
But I have to say that so many of my guests pick missionary. And
Yeah.
it's not just women, it's also gay men that I've heard it from as well.
Ah,
And I think it's interesting. And most people say that it's because of the connection that you feel, because you're facing your partner, you can see into their eyes, you can really connect with them. And with you, adding the pillow is giving you more internal G spot
mhm.
stimulation that helps you to get there, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I'll also say I like it because it's the easiest position for me to get my vibrator in there too.
and that's interesting because I have a hard time in that position using a vibrator. And so I've asked that before. And the people that do like that position typically have teeny tiny little
I have
vibrators,
a
like a
thin
little,
one. Yeah.
okay, okay. so, like a bullet, or, even like the one that the necklace one that, I forgot the name of it now, but I talked about it another day. It's a thin one also.
Yeah.
It's like a little rod, um, can work in that position too.
Yep. We used the We Vibe, and it
The
was like
We Vibe.
the flexible tip. So like the tip is wide but very thin, perfect
Okay.
for clitoral stimulation, because you can pretty much like, you don't have to be too exact. It's got a little bit more surface area
That's what
to
I
get
like.
between the two of you.
Yes, and that's what I like the rose for, because the rose has a lot of surface area, which I
Yeah.
like. But it doesn't fit in missionary
Yeah.
unless you're modifying the missionary position where there's more space between you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's great. I mean, 95% of women need clitoral stimulation in order to reach orgasm. So it's important that, we talk about this so that we, can give people ideas on how to, get that stimulation. And there's absolutely no shame in bringing toys into the bedroom. So,
Yeah.
make sure that if you want to do that, express it to your partner, and, or just show up with it,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's very rare that someone's going to say, put that away. And
Right.
if they do, maybe that's not the right person, for
Right.
you.
100%. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I want to make sure that my guests can find you. So please let us know where we can find you.
Sure. You can find me on Instagram at Leslie Draffin, or you can check out my podcast, The Light Within. And also, I'd love to offer to your guests, if you're listening to this podcast, this conversation, you're feeling pussy waking up, but maybe you would like a little bit more guidance, or you've been in therapy for a while and don't know why the fuck it's not working for you. I have recently opened my sacred community, The Sanctuary, which is built around awakening your pleasure, your power, and your purpose, to help women confidently claim what they want in life and in the bedroom, and allow pleasure to really awaken their powerful and most radiant versions of themselves. So I'd love to offer your listeners a code, SISTER, to come into the community for 2 months free. Because I really feel like when you're in this sacred community of other women being held and witnessed in your healing, you're much more than just friends, you're a family. So that's code SISTER, and it's just for folks who listen to me on podcasts like yours.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And I will be joining with that sister code. So
Awesome. Can't wait to see
I'm
you.
I'm so excited about that. Thank you so much for offering that. As a licensed physical therapist, like I said before, I treat conditions of the pelvic floor and sexual health conditions such as erectile dysfunction, decreased vaginal sensitivity, and dryness, and other sexual health conditions such as painful periods, etc. So if that's you and you're listening, please don't be shy and reach out and say hello. You can find me on pleaseme.online or on any of my social media. So reach out. I always answer all of my messages. It may take me a couple days, but I find them and I answer. So please feel free to say hello. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I had such a great conversation, and I can't wait to join with the code. Say it again.
The code SISTER for my sacred
Sister.
community called The Sanctuary.
Thank you so much. Until next time, everyone. Visit pleaseme.online to reach Eve, or for more information on products to increase blood flow and overall health, for her curated list of her favorite toys, and for swag that shows that you are a big fan. Please consider supporting the show.